Welcome back to Rise and Rouse, a podcast for those who give a damn. This is your host, Erin Allgood, social impact strategist, consultant, and former gifted kid. Today on the podcast, I have Sasha Breus, a life coach who really had to learn how to follow her intuition and pursue the kind of work that she really was meant to pursue. She talks about her professional experience and learning how to let it all go. You won't want to miss today's conversation. It's a lot of fun. I'm so excited for you all to meet Sasha Breus today, my good friend and amazing life coach. You're going to hear all about her approach to the work that she does and all of that in just a little bit. But before we dive into that, I'll give you just a sense of who Sasha is. Sasha is a first-generation American who grew up on the beautiful coast of the Passamaquoddy and Penobscot lands. You can tell I am a New Englander because I knew how to pronounce that. And she's really had cultivated a love of nature over time. And she studied geology at Smith College and then went on to have a career in the sciences for a long time. So for more than 15 years, Sasha tried to save the world and fix global climate change by working in science education, nonprofit administration, research, landscaping, local food endeavors. And then at that point, she realized it was time to do something different. So we're going to talk a lot about that today and her background and how she came to that decision to transition out and how she's moving through the world now differently than she was before. So Sasha, do you want to fill in some of the gaps that I might have left out in that introduction?
Sure. Well, thanks, Erin. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is really fun. I'm excited to be able to connect with you in this way. Gosh, the gaps. I mean, to be frank, I've done a lot of different things in my life. I think some of that's just what I was used to. You know, as you mentioned, we emigrated. I was a toddler, but we moved around a lot, obviously from one country to another, but then even just within sort of the town or two where I grew up, we moved a lot, had a lot of different people come in and out of my life. And I think, some of that's been challenging, but I think some of it also helped me to really be open to trying new things. And so for better or for worse, I've done a lot of different things. I've had a lot of different jobs. I went to 4 different schools to earn 2 degrees. So, the gaps, filling in the gaps, it's everything from working at Harvard and supporting students in the lab to catering and landscaping and stapling down a lawn,
I love that. I mean, that's kind of, when I tell people some of my background, they're kind of like, wait, what did you do? And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Just, whatever. People want to see a direct line from where you went, they want to see that linear progression. And I'm so invested in telling people that it's usually not that and that it's okay.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. It's actually something I've been trying to teach myself over the years. Part of me just kept doing this very nonlinear thing, but it never really felt okay. I never felt like it was the right thing to do. It never felt like it was accepted, especially being book smart, being, and I have to say this in quotes, right? But being smart, quote unquote, in a way that just happens to gel really well with what modern education looks like now. There were a lot of expectations that I would follow a certain path. You go to college and then you go get your 9 to 5 and you have stability and you have your 401k and it all works out. And I kept being sort of I'm going to say encouraged, pushed onto that path, and it never felt right. So I sort of kept trying, and then I would do it for 6 months or 12 months or a couple years, and then I would go work at a bakery, or I would go haul rocks, or I would be unemployed for a while. So yeah, I think it's such a great point. Life is not linear. I think we all know this to be true. I think we all know it, but somehow the story is that it's supposed to be. And I think it's a really unfortunate and sort of constraining way to look at things. And so I suppose that's part of what I'm doing now is reminding myself that it's okay. And then also trying to support other people to let go of that and feel that expansiveness and understand that it's not linear. And so last night I was out to music. This is a tangent, but it'll come back around, I promise. And every Thursday in the summertime in the town where I live, there's music. It's free. It's local bands. It's a family-friendly event. Everyone comes out with their picnics and their wine. And it's a really, really lovely thing. And I knew both bands that were playing. And I was looking up at these people and being like, wow, like they are excellent musicians. They love what they're doing. And they all have their own day jobs that are totally unrelated. And I also know for a fact that many of them do other things too. And it was such a lovely reminder in that moment for me that you don't have to, like, we're not monolithic, right? We have so many different parts of ourselves that can come through. And I was really, and perhaps I was, I don't know, idolizing these people a little bit in the moment, but I was really appreciating them as an example of putting your creative energy into multiple different pursuits and just like being okay with that, or even celebrating that. It was like such a nice reminder that, like, as someone, for example, I've started this coaching business, and it's so meaningful to me. And also sometimes I have to remind myself to just like relax. It's so important to me, and it's not all of who I am. There are other parts of me too that can be important and unrelated. And I can say unrelated in, sort of quotes, unrelated professionally. Anywho, that's my tangent on.
No, I think it's such a good point that you're making. I feel like I keep seeing all of these memes like on Instagram now, where it's like the gifted child to dehydrated bisexual who loves plants, like pipeline. I'm like, I keep finding all these memes that I relate way too much to, and I'm just like, oh no, I guess that's true. But it's but I think those of us who did kind of grow up in that way, where we're like, we were the academically really smart kids and things like that, we were funneled into like these pathways that we were told that we had to follow because that was the only like marker of success that we had. And then if you weren't living up to that in some way, people are like, well, what are you doing with your life? And, how does this connect to everything else? Yeah. And I think the implication is you're being irresponsible in some way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the reason that has so much hold is because our worth, and I'm sure you've talked about this multiple times with other people, but our worth is tied to our job. And not only our job, but really how we make money, how we get money into our name. It's sort of wild. And so if we're not on the path, if we're not on the professional path, then like you were saying, like what else is there? It's wild. And so having been on this sort of trying to be on the professional path off and on for many, many years, and then dabbling more and more and finally sort of exiting this professional path, people would say like, oh, well, what are you doing for work? Right. That's always the question, right? How are you? Which is usually not really what people are asking. And, oh, well, what do you do for work? And I became so annoyed and uncomfortable with that question because I didn't want to deal with people's discomfort or judgment, and certainly my own too. I was uncomfortable with what I was doing, even though I was on that path of not being in this professional pipeline. I started developing all of these sort of verbal, linguistical, like acrobatics around like answering those questions or ignoring the questions. And I also started, or rather stopped, I stopped asking people what they did for work. And instead I would say, how do you spend your time? When I met someone new, or even if it was someone that I knew, I might just say, how have you been spending your time recently? And it's really interesting to me how some people hear that question and respond with however they want. They sort of take the invitation to respond in a more open sort of way. And some people launch right into what they do for work. I think because they think that that's what you're asking. They assume that's the question. But it's still, I think, nice to offer people that generosity.
I am somebody who defaults a lot to like back to like my work because I'm because I'm passionate about it and I love it. And I feel like I have broken free in so many ways because I get to do the work that I get to do in the same way that you do too. And I have to restrain myself from having to be like, yeah, I'm a consultant and here's all the things I do. And I don't know. I met one of my partners, like childhood good friends recently. And I was just like, the topic of what I do for work never came up. And I kind of was just like, oh, but like, that's such a big part of who I am. And like, just really interesting.
It's a great point. I think that question of identity, right? Because I've been struggling with the same thing a little bit, where I think for a long time I was trying to find, because I felt like the message was I need to have a particular type of job or like be showing up in the world, right? Everyone wants to know that. But then now that I am much more focused on work that I am very passionate about, there is still that question of like how much of my identity is wrapped up in what I do versus like other parts of myself. And I can't even really speak eloquently about it in any way because it's such a big question for me still. And I'm really curious. I think that there are some challenges with tying your identity to what you do for work.
Oh, absolutely.
And for many of us, we care, if not outright very passionate about what we do for work. And so when that is taken away, or if we're unable to do our work, then it can feel like a big loss. I worked with a client who had been a teacher and wasn't able to continue to be a teacher. And that question of identity in work was enormous. And I still think about it all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of your clients are wrestling with some of those things because that's what you do as a coach. You're helping them explore their identity, right? Like that's probably like the core of what you do.
That's a great question statement. I think so. And perhaps another way of phrasing it is we are exploring the stories we tell about ourselves. Because some, like this client I just mentioned, that absolutely, the word identity absolutely came up. But I think in lots of other contexts, especially in sort of lower touch coaching context with individuals, it's more about, what's the story that they're telling themselves in that moment? And we can get so caught up in it that it can be hard to see ourselves. Like even those of us that are the most aware and very well practiced at being aware, we cannot be aware of ourselves all the time, right? And we don't need to be either, I don't think. That's like the benefit of having the outside perspective. And so the thing that I love, love, love doing is reflecting back to people what I'm hearing so that they have an opportunity to see it or hear it or engage with it. I think of it as like taking it from the back of the brain and pulling it to the front. And it's something that I love to support people with. And it's something that we can learn to do for ourselves more and more. Through becoming a coach, I am able to coach myself more now, which is very cool. So yeah, the identity, the piece of the story, it's very, very powerful what we tell ourselves about ourselves. And then what we are telling ourselves about others and about the world. And I think the most incredible, biggest truth, I'll call it, I'll be bold and say it's a truth, is that we get to decide. We are completely and fully in control of the stories we tell ourselves, of how we relate to ourselves, which isn't to say that there isn't so much external pressure. I'm not trying to negate any of that reality because it's big and it's painful and it's hard. It's so much work to push back on that. But I think it's very worthwhile work. And it is incredible when you can tune into yourself and realize that you get to decide. It is the most liberating realization for me anyways. And I hope to support other people to get at least little tastes of that.
As you were talking, I was kind of like, oh, I'm so interested to hear, because you mentioned you know how to coach yourself better now. Like, I'm so interested to hear what it is, like examining the stories you were telling yourself, how those stories have shifted. And now what are the things, how are you coaching yourself in this moment to like move through the world differently? Because like, it's a big question, I know too. So feel free to answer however works for you.
It's a wonderful question. It is very big. I think the entry point into this very big question for me in the moment is around awareness. So part of coaching myself is developing higher ability, more of an ability to be aware. So I, for example, and this stuff is so big, and then also it can be so mundane, right? Like in the day-to-day lived life, it's like I'm walking around my kitchen, I'm like, I'm in a bad mood. Like, well, actually, first what happens is I am just in the bad mood, right? And I'm stomping around the kitchen. And then what I'm able to do now, at times, I'm slightly more adept now than, let's say, a year ago at recognizing that I'm in a bad mood. And that's sort of, I think that's really like the first step. I can be like, oh, I'm in a bad mood. And then the next step is like, okay, great, good awareness. Why? What's going on? What's going on that I'm in a bad mood? So once I recognize that I'm feeling a certain way, I can ask myself, what's going on? And I've also become much more adept at really actually asking myself rather than just immediately judging myself. So when I'm angry, and I think being a woman, being raised as a woman and identifying as a woman, like being angry and emotional is not okay. And so I've spent a lot of my life being this sensitive, emotional, angry woman or girl or whatever. And that always felt like just who I was or what was happening, and also wrong. And so, God, there's so many layers to it, right? But I've gotten to a point where I can help myself not immediately just feel crappy about feeling crappy. Well, sometimes I do, but I'm better now at like not feeling angry about the fact that I'm feeling angry, which gives me space to open up and ask myself with curiosity instead of judgment, what's going on? And sometimes it's a legitimate reason, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's because for example, I just had the most incredible weekend with my partner. We celebrated our 2-year anniversary, and it was a really beautiful weekend that we created for ourselves. And we got home, and the next couple days, I got increasingly grumpy. And I was like, what is going on? And a couple days later, I was like, I think, and this is a theory I can get into in a moment, but I think perhaps what I was doing was I had such a great time. I had to like bring myself back down, which is this really unfortunate thing that happens. But I think that it does. Oh my gosh, what's the author's name? Gay Hendricks. I think he's quite popular. He's been around for decades, and he wrote this book called The Big Leap. And he talks about upper limiting ourselves, how we upper limit ourselves. It's like a thermostat, and we sort of feel good to a certain point, and then we bring ourselves back down because we, for a variety of reasons, we don't allow ourselves to get beyond that point. And so coaching myself is around having some increased awareness to see what's happening, and then also a little bit of space and grace to ask myself what is actually going on. And I think too, learning that whatever I'm feeling or thinking in the moment isn't the end all be all, and it might not even be real, which is fascinating because I'm both learning to trust myself more and also learning to be like, okay, Sasha, like, no, like you just made that shit up. Like, that's not real. Like you're not actually upset about anything. You're not actually grumpy. You're just upper limiting yourself. And like, I can just go back to feeling really fucking fantastic now because I just had this most incredible experience with my partner. Anyways, I think that's some response to the question of like how I'm able to coach myself. And I think the beautiful thing is that everyone's capable of doing that, of learning that, and I think some of us are just more tuned into it. And I think even, like I said earlier, even for those of us that are aware or sensitive or tuned in, like even I benefit so gratefully from having an outside perspective. I mean, my partner so often is like, hey, you're being grumpy. Like, what's going on? In a really helpful way. If I'm not having that awareness for myself in the moment, we do it for each other. And that is such a gift too.
That is one thing I've found with my partner as well too, is that like self-reflection that he's able to give to me. And there are some times where it's not always helpful. There's sometimes where it's incredibly insightful. And then there are times where it's like, you need to go eat a snack or something. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not just hungry. But, that is kind of, it's really funny because I'm like, it's at the point now where, say we're in the car or something like that. And I'm like, oh, I'm hungry. He's like, okay. He like looks at his watch and he's like, all right, we've got 20 minutes before you turn into like a little hangry monster. So what do you want to do? Like, oh, okay. It's very problem solving, very good at like troubleshooting all of that stuff together, which I appreciate in a partner.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing. Like, it's hard being on our own, and we're not really, we didn't evolve to be on our own. It can be such a beautiful gift, and it can be very hard too, right? Like, we are intimate with our partners. Mm-hmm. Like, they know us, but not 100% all the time. It can be hard, and it can be easier to not always be our best selves around them either.
Yep.
But it's a wonderful challenge. It's a phrase I've used a lot in the last year and a half of my life, since I sort of wrote in my bio about like brazenly taking on this new outlook on life, a really different way of looking at things. And it's not easier per se, but it's the right type of challenge. I am delighted for the opportunity to have the challenge of figuring out how to live with my partner and do life together. It's what I want, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's so easy, and sometimes it's not. It's like, okay, I accept this challenge. Bring it on. It's a good one. And it's the same thing with learning how to start a business and coaching and everything that I am exploring. It's the right type of challenge, compared to the challenge of trying to fit into a 9-to-5 or an academic career that was just never working for me.
It's really liberating when we stop trying to put ourselves, like when we're the like round peg trying to go into a square hole, or the other way around, square peg trying to go into the round hole. Like, it's once we stop doing that and you're just like, oh, I like can just allow myself to be whatever shape I want to be. Like, it's pretty cool.
I think there's so much more energy. I realized how much energy I was expending trying to fit in all the time. And I think that that's true for a lot of us. I think many, many, many of us are doing that. I'm always curious about like, okay, well, evolution and how does that work? And biologically, and we're mammals and the social species, and like we need to fit in, but also we exhaust ourselves trying to fit in. And I imagine that fitting in the 21st century is really different from fitting in when we came out of the trees.
Yeah.
It's a different type of fitting in. But yeah, it's very liberating. And I have found that I have so much more energy to do the things I actually want to be doing. Like for a long time, I thought I was going to contribute by solving global climate change. I knew I wasn't a scientist at that level, but I was just so desperate, frankly, to help. And I thought that was the way I was going to help. And it was strange and hard to let go of that. It was strange and hard to let go of like being involved in science or even science education to then go do this thing where I was like sitting and talking with one person at a time. But it is what I can do. And it is much more sustainable for me. I have so much more energy to actually contribute when I'm not also fighting myself or trying to fight to fit into an unsustainable lifestyle or an unsustainable 9-to-5 career trajectory. And I'm a bit of a broken record here. It's not easy. And certainly I have so many resources that make it easier for me to do this. I have a family to lean on if I broke my leg and I needed money. I'm so aware that I have these resources to help me make that change. So I don't mean to be saying like, oh, everyone should just go do exactly what they feel like doing in any given moment. I know it's not that easy, but I also think that if we can, in small or big ways, move even just incrementally towards being more in line with ourselves, we expend less energy either trying to fit in. And another way of putting it is I have so much energy and I was putting it against myself. I turned it on myself. And that was really exhausting, you know? So like that liberation you're talking about when we stop trying to fit in, it's not even just externally we're putting that energy, but it's also like, for me, it was not turning that energy against myself. And once I stopped doing that, it's like energy begets energy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
it's not finite. I guess, you know, the question that is kind of coming up for me is like getting rid of the 9 to 5, because so many people, that's kind of like what their life is. You know what I mean? Like it is governed by literally those 8 hours where their time is not their own, and it is the time of somebody's like an employer of some sort. Even those of us who are like self-employed. For me, like I work usually between like the hours, somewhere between the hours of 9 to 6, depending on the day. So sometimes it's 10 to 3, sometimes, you know, whatever. What do your days look like? You know what I mean? Like, so, because I think for so many people, and there's a reason why I'm asking this, like, what do your days look like once you have completely divested, or maybe even incompletely divested from the 9 to 5? Because so many people don't know what it looks like, so they can't imagine it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And initially, my days looked sort of like a 9 to 5. You know, it's a good reminder. I use the term 9 to 5 to mean something, which is more of the sort of punching the clock, going to work for someone else on someone else's schedule because that's what's expected. The truth is that, I mean, it's somewhat variable. And really, I think it really just depends on the individual. I know you're asking sort of what do my days look like? And I'm happy to share, but I think it just depends on the individual and where they're at. So for me, frankly, in the beginning, it was a challenge, but I also have had a lot of experience over the years where I was unemployed or partially employed or working part-time at a bakery and then also consulting, working as a contractor. So I'm in some ways I'm used to it. But I would say that my sort of happiest time for a few really excellent months, I had a really nice rhythm where it was approximately 9 to 5. And I would sort of laugh. I was joking with myself and sort of laughing at myself, being like, oh my God, I, you know, decided to do something different just to end up in the 9 to 5. However, the morning part of that often included going to the gym to a class. And I didn't consider that work per se, but it was very much a part of my day. And it helped me then do the work afterwards. And I also found that having some sort of structure allowed me to not get up and feeling like I had to keep working all the time when I was actually, you know, if my day ended at 5 more or less, I could actually set the work down at 5 and then not think that I had to keep going later in the evening. We get to decide. I know that's perhaps sort of a boring answer, but I think that if someone is considering truly being on their own, or, you know, they have a business with a few employees and they're able to set up their own schedule, I would say tune into what you know works for you, or do the exploration to figure out what works for you, and then trust it. Trust it. So for example, actually right now I'm struggling because there are some things I'd like to do in my business and I feel like they require computer time. And I have a pretty finite amount of computer time in me every day. And so that's shifted how I'm doing my business right now. And it's a challenge. It's hard. I don't love it. But I'm also just trying to respect the fact that if I force myself to do something that I know doesn't work for me, it might be worth it in the short term. But long term, I'm not going to set up my schedule that way because it will just sap my energy. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it to me.
I mean, one of the things I think you're alluding to here is like, it's so much of being able to divest from, and I think it's more of like a 9 to 5 mentality. I think that's where you're getting at. It's like a mentality versus like the literal number, like the hours that you work. It doesn't really matter. But that mentality of like chained to your desk and like having to perform like consistently all the time and so on and so forth. And like not having the ability to like recognize and go with the flow of your energy. So I was telling you before, I facilitated for the entire day on Wednesday and just a couple days ago. And I was like, had a real awesome high in the beginning for that first half. And even the second half of like facilitating was one of the best facilitations I've ever done in my life. And as soon as I got into the car to go home, I've just deflated. And then I know myself well enough now that whenever I'm facilitating, even if it's a half day, not even a full day, like I usually block the entire next day off because I'm a potato. And even like yesterday, the day after, I had a couple meetings I couldn't have shifted. And so I ended up taking a nap on the couch, like in my office, because I couldn't function. I was like not able to function anymore. And because of how we have, I think, like capitalism, survival, our normal kind of like workplaces, the, kind of traditional, conventional workplaces, our nervous system gets attuned to the stress of all of that. And so then we are like
Absolutely.
anxiously checking in and doing the work and powering through past our emotional and physical like states in order to be able to continue to perform. And it's like, no wonder we're all so overcaffeinated, so overmedicated, so, dying of heart disease and things like that in this country, because the way that we live and work is not conducive to actually like healthy lifestyles, healthy mental states, any of that.
Yeah. I think you're so right on with how you framed all of that. It's just the story. It's just a freaking story. It's what we know, right? It's what we've been doing. It's what our parents did. And of course, we're mostly talking about a segment of the population that like, white collar, whatever. But it's not how it's been for that long. I think in the like broader human evolution perspective, like we haven't been operating this way. And so if we can just pause, even just for half a second, one time, realize like we can set this down, or that it's okay, or that it's not real, or that it's just a story. And the story has real implications. Like, yeah, we need to pay our bills, of course. And that's the tricky thing with all of this. And it's something I continue, slight tangent here, I continue to like really think about basically every day is this like, I'm engaged in this like deeply energetic, spiritual, human connection work. And also like we have these physical bodies that need to like be fed and watered, and we go outside and we like have to go to work and we have to pay our bills, and like that's all still real, and finding a way to integrate all of that. Like it's actually a really exciting challenge. I think we can do something to make internal changes, those internal shifts that is within our abilities. I really believe that to be true, that we can all learn if we'd like to support ourselves in that way. And so finding ways to divest from a really stressful situation in whatever little minute way you can is, I think it's a beautiful endeavor. It's a worthwhile endeavor.
I think it's, there's some people who are just not ready to divest fully too. I think your point about it can be like, I like the internal and external. I think that's a really helpful framing, but like creating that kind of change for people to create that kind of change for themselves, whether it's with a coach or without, like it requires changing their mindsets. Like you said, the stories about what they tell themselves, and then how that feeds into the mindsets. And then that's like the actual, that changes perhaps even like the community they're surrounding themselves with. Like, like there's so many changes. And so like even smaller changes start to ripple out in bigger ways. And then that can pave the way for other changes. And that's what that's one of the things I do a lot with organizations, is just help them create like something that is manageable. Because if I'm like, yeah, here you go, just change it all right now, like that's not sustainable. Yeah. Like, in the same way that I think for you, you were like, oh, you started your business and then you were like, oh, wow, I'm still just doing a 9 to 5. Okay. So, but like, but to an extent, there was probably something about that structure that was really familiar and comforting and easy to like, to maintain as you're making this much bigger, larger transition in your life.
Absolutely. It's a great point. I think I can get caught up in grand ideas and big sweeping changes. And the truth is, I did make a decision to do my life really differently. And on the outside, it didn't look very different. I think most people looking in would not have recognized that my life changed in such a big way. And part of that's because I didn't make it, I didn't move towns or whatever, right? Or like have a new partner, a new house. But the other part of that is things can happen in an instant. And habit is strong. It's big, for better or for worse, right? Like strong habits can be such a wonderful part of our life. And when we have been conditioned for decades or generations even, or even just, let's say we've been doing the same job for a while, or we've had the same habits for our own lifetime, like it takes some work. It takes some time to let go of those and shift them and make new ones. So I think you're so right on. And it sort of depends on the individual person. I have a background in environmental education. So I'm always like, well, what's your learning style? Like, how does it work for you? So it does depend on the individual. Some, like my best friend, we are so different. She does think about things in a more binary way. And when she makes a decision to change something in her life, she picks a date and then she moves forward with her life on that date. That is so not how I do things. It's like the opposite. Funny. I need to sort of, I don't know, tickle my way into it. Not tickle, what's the right word? Like tickle sort of, I have this
great word.
It's like this funny little dance of getting into it. It takes me a while, even if I've made a decision on something big or small, it can just take a bit to get there. And so giving yourself some grace and space, again, that humility and humor, easier said than done, but I found it to be really helpful. And I so appreciate how you said that that's how you help organizations too, right? It's another way of framing it is meeting people where they're at. Instead of coming in and saying, okay, well, you want to change, let's just turn everything upside down, being like, okay, well, what's one reasonable step you can take? And then what's the next follow-up step? And so much easier said than done. I'm good at saying this out loud to you now, but I'm like, oh, Sasha, what's your next step, girl? I need to be taking my own steps here, right? But I think you're so right on. And it depends on the context. It depends on the individual. Some people are going to say, no, you have to take this really definitive action and just cut everything off. And okay, if that works for you and you know that to be true about yourself, great. I think for many of us, it is that one little incremental step followed by another one. What's your next aligned action? That's not my term. I got that from someone else. What is your next aligned action? And then just do that and keep following up.
I think that it's you're thinking about this so critically. So those moments where you're not quite taking your own advice, I think is, I think it's okay. Because you're constantly thinking about this though. And I can't remember exactly what you just said that kind of sparked that for me. Because there's plenty of times where I don't take my own advice too. Oh, that's the piece I think I was going to say is that you don't have to do it by yourself either. So if you don't know what your next aligned action is, I'm here to help you with all of that too. You know what I mean? That's kind of part of being in the business ecosystem. I don't know. That's part of capitalism too, is you have to figure out how to do all of this shit by yourself. And you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever bullshit. And it's I have made the most progress in my life when I have opened myself up to connecting with other people and allowing them to share insight or thoughts or help me kind of figure out how to move forward. But I love that term, next aligned action. I know you said that's not yours, but I like it. And I now will forever associate it with you as I now use it in my work moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. When just now, as you said, it's a great part about the sort of business ecosystem. It's the beautiful thing about being human and being part of the human ecosystem or just the world ecosystem, because I think that's true business wise, but also just energetically, human-wise, mammalian, whatever. Like, we are all freaking connected. We are so connected. And that's the like funny paradox, is like, we are individually ourselves, and it's all up to us how we relate to ourselves, and also simultaneously we are connected to everything and part of everything. And so like leaning into both of those at the same time is this like wild, joyful ride. But I do really appreciate what you're saying too, more specifically about the business ecosystem. And I totally agree. I've definitely been seeking advice and just examples, just seeing how other people do it. And so I really appreciate your generosity around that as well. Of course.
Like, part of what I see as like my own kind of personal theory of change is like, I want to make sure that other people can experience like some of the liberation that I experience too. And like part of that is helping other business owners like yourself figure out like just how to do this well, and I've been in this game now. I've been in the entrepreneurship game for a decade, over a decade, and I want more people doing good work in the world, so we don't have things like, emerald mines and things like that. All I can think of is like how shitty Elon Musk is, and like that to me is like the like example of shitty business that I like always kind of reflect back on. I'm like, we need less of that, more of what you and I do in the world. And that's, how do we get more of that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I think that one of your previous guests said, Rachel McNeil, she was talking about intimacy and sex, and I hope I'm getting this right, but I think she said something like, sex is this moment to just be present, like with no other anything, like just like it, like even, and if we want to bring it back to capitalism, like that's anti-capitalist. That is a brave act. That's what I was going to say. And I know this can sound mushy and woo-woo and whatever, but like actually taking half a fucking second to pause and not feel like you have to be doing more. And it's not, I think the other part of it was like, that's not a message only for people who think that capitalism is bad, right? Like that is a message to everyone alive today. Because of the state of our modern world, it's about being alive in the 21st century and choosing to like, it feels, I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like things are moving faster. And I think a lot of us are caught up in that. And so if that is true for you, then, give yourself permission to like not be caught up just for a moment.
Yeah. Just to like allow yourself to be. And I love that you said something about Rachel and back in that episode, because that was such a brilliant episode. And yeah, just like, why would we, I think part of the point she was making in that moment was like, why would we rush sex? Like, why do we rush through sex? It's like, like, this is fun. It's free. And like, you feel great. Like, why would we rush through that? And I think we're so predisposed in this world because of all of everything we've been talking about over the last hour, like to rush through things, to be disconnected to what we really need in a moment, to like not give ourselves the spaciousness to like actually feel into something because we are so focused on the next thing, or producing, whatever it is, because the way our, like you just said, the modern world sets us up like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautifully said on your part. Like, this has been amazing. This has like been so much fun to have this conversation, this dedicated time together. I'm really like just so grateful that we were able to make this happen. And that I ask everybody what it means to give a damn, so I'm going to give you some space to answer that, before we finally close it up.
Thanks. And yeah, thank you so much for making this time, for creating this. Your intention to make this space for you and for your guests, it's a real gift. So thank you for that. What it means to give a damn. I had some warning this question was coming, and I initially really struggled to answer it until I realized that I think it's because I care so much. And so for me right now, where I'm at right now, giving a damn, actually, it relates to me giving a damn about myself and helping myself have the boundaries and the love, the awareness of just being me, so that I actually can be good in myself, so that I can show up in the ways that I want to. And that answer surprised me a little bit. And I know it's not true for everyone, but I think also a lot of people, and perhaps especially a lot of women, but also men certainly, I think a lot of us don't actually really care for ourselves in the ways that we could. And somehow it's seen to be selfish. But what I have been learning is that my whole life, I have been wanting to show up for others, to contribute, to do something meaningful, to help, to make things better. I've cared so much my whole life. And I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't actually showing up and helping. I mean, perhaps I mean, I was in some ways, but like, I wasn't actually really available to show up. And what I have been learning is that I need to give a damn about myself, not in a like be focused inward sort of way, but in a like just be okay. Just do the thing for me to be okay. So I can then take all of that beautiful energy and like be the conduit I want to be, and that I know I can be, and that I think will be helpful. You know, it's my contribution. And so, gosh, giving a damn means letting go of the fear, living less in a place of fear, living less in a place of scarcity, trusting a little bit more, taking care of myself so that I can actually show up in the way I want to be showing up for everything and everyone around me. What a great question. I think it'd be really fun to, maybe I'll put it on my calendar to ask myself that question in 6 months or 18 months from now. Yeah. That would be very cool.
Yeah, it's actually, you saying that, it makes me realize like I haven't answered it for myself. Whew, maybe that's, oh my. See, you're such a good coach. Now I'm reflecting so much. But it's powerful because it's like, it like makes it get to that, makes you really think about like what is really important, and how does it show up? How do you show up to what's important? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I like that as a framing question moving forward to kind of give yourself that check-in. And I'm so grateful that it can be that for you too, because yeah. So now I guess it's going to be that for me too. Thank you so welcome. Oh, Sasha, this is so great. We are of course going to like put into the show notes how folks can get in contact with you. But is there anything else you want to share about where folks can find you?
Oh, yeah, just the Calendly link for now is good.
And this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much, Sasha. I'm so excited to like introduce you to listeners and to just like introduce you to the world in so many ways through this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. It's such a joy, such a delight to connect. I love doing this, and I love talking with you, and your questions are really insightful. Thank you for creating such a pleasant space to connect.